It's the weekly show about Pro AV with the hottest news in the AV industry. It's rAVe TV. Give it up for Steph and Gary. Steph and Gary.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Gary K without Steph. You get me, but we have Steph stepping in with a really cool interview today. She is actually out today at the Exertis Alamo E4 experience in New Jersey. So you got me today, and I'm gonna blaze through the news. And at the end of today's show, you may recall last week we mentioned a study done by a Yale professor on the quality of microphones and how much of a difference it makes in people's perceptions of you. This was a scientific study done by Yale, and it really benefits our industry because basically the end result of the study is that you need to have a good microphone to actually be taken seriously. And I think this can be used as a marketing tool in the AV industry, even though it wasn't designed as a marketing tool, because you can literally tell your customers, hey, not just in your meeting spaces, but also when you're at home and you're joining as a remote participant, you need to have a good quality mic to be taken seriously. So actually, Steph, that article is published on NPR. It's on ravepubs.com right now. But Steph actually had an interview with the professor at Yale University who performed the study. So we're actually going to play that. We're going to play that that interview with you. And he is a professor of psychology at Yale University and runs the Yale Perception and Cognitive Lab, which is a pretty big deal over there. And it's pretty interesting. I see a few other companies in our industry talking about this study. We jumped on it when we saw it. But I want to start with first reminding you that you're watching rAVe TV. This is the industry's only live weekly TV show, and we bring this. We basically curate the news. I mean, there's probably between 75 and 100 new news stories every single week. Some weeks more, like an Infocom show or a ISE show, we may get literally 500-600 pieces of news in a week. But generally, in a week, we get 75 to 100. And we're curating, say, the top 10 stories that you need to pay attention to every single week. That's the point of this show. We come to you live on ravepubs.com. Literally, we come to you live on my YouTube page. On my LinkedIn page, but we also come to you live on YouTube at youtube.com/ravepubs. So you have lots of places to watch it. We also put it on X as well. But I want to start with a quick clip about an interview we posted earlier this week that I did with Dave Labuskes of AVIXA. Dave is the CEO of AVIXA. He's been in that role since 2012, so he's been there almost 13 years now. But at the end of this year, it'll be 13 years. Dave actually comes from the industry. He's not just an association head. As you may know, AVIXA is our industry's association in the commercial side. They partner together with CEDIA, the industry's association for the residential side, to put on the ISE show every year, but they also put on the Infocom show every June, which if you're in our industry, you already know what Infocom is. So he comes from the industry, so he has some pretty good insight. And I actually literally decided to do a state of the Pro AV industry interview with him. So I want to show you this quick clip. It's about a minute or so long, and I preface it with a question that he answers really well. And check this out and tell me what you think. Started off, I feel, from my perspective, pretty good, considering there was a lot of talk about the tariffs. There was a lot of talk about the political climate. There was a lot of talk about the world events. But ISE, from all internal and external viewpoints, seemed to be an amazing show and sort of kick off what appears to be 3 months into the year a great year. But maybe I'm skewed by seeing it from my lens.
Yeah, well, it certainly was a great show, and blew out all the records of any type of statistical tracking. In as much as it is a indicator of how our industry is doing, it certainly said our industry is on fire. The general sense is that we are less blazing than we were in the last few years, but more to sort of a more normalized growth rate at this stage. We're still global GDP is about 2.7. We estimate our industry is growing at about 5.4%. So anytime you're in an industry that's growing at twice the pace of the global economy, you made a good career choice. So definitely have our headwinds, but we also have tailwinds. And the fact that we have shifted to essentially a hybrid office space, a lot of what was sort of thrown in crisis throughout the various different verticals immediately upon the impact of COVID is getting refreshed, getting replaced. So that, yes, there are certainly wrinkles. We are all get to wake up or go to sleep hearing something new that's happening globally, and business in general doesn't love uncertainty. We can pretty much manage through anything if we're certain of what is going to be facing us. But yeah, overall, we are in a good place as the AV industry.
That is a great interview. That's kind of that kind of prefaces a bunch of questions that I ask him about some different segments of the market, what he thinks the likelihood of 2025 is going to be in each one of those segments. And we also talk about the upcoming Infocom show and some of the stuff they're doing there. It's a great interview. You can see it. You can scan that QR code that's going to appear on your screen. I don't know why it's not up there. We should pop that QR code up there and just keep it up here today if we can, Jeff. That you can scan that QR code that will eventually appear on the screen, and that way you can get access to everything we're talking about today. Of course, that is at ravepubs.com. If you go to ravepubs.com and scroll down to our video cast or podcast section, or you click that menu up in the top, you'll see that interview is one of the last ones that we just posted up on the website. That QR code should appear at some point in time, right, Jeff? Is it going to come up? Yes or no? No, we're working on it. Can we get the QR code? Okay, perfect. That'll make it a lot easier for them. All right, so let's go on to the next story. As I mentioned, Steph is at the Exertis Almo E4 show, and they actually just announced a rebrand of their services. Now, they have a bunch of services like digital signage design. They actually have a service for integrators where if you're backed up on labor, they can actually provide labor for you. They can do systems design. They're rebranding all of those services under one umbrella called Link Lab. That story is on our website. Next story, Extron is shipping the MLC Plus 400. This is an interesting small room, great for UC or classroom applications because it's a touchscreen that can be programmed, but it's very, very small. And so it's like a mini touchscreen, but it also has a controller built into it. So you don't actually have to have a separate controller for the room. One of the things that was introduced at ISE that was super popular was from Shure, and it's their Microflex Next 4, Next 8. You may recall that we gave the Next 2 best of show at Infocom at ISE last year. And it is a wireless drop-in wireless system that gives you the ability to have two different kinds of mics. You can have a boundary mic, a lav mic, or a handheld mic. And you can add it to any classroom on the fly. You don't have to put something in the rack to do that. It can actually interface with whatever you already have in the classroom as long as you have distributed audio in the classroom or speakers. Well, they actually expanded it at ISE and introduced a 4, meaning 4 mics, and an 8 mic version. And they added a gooseneck mic to that. So it's perfect for conference applications. So check this out so that you see what product this is. So check it out. right. So that product is awesome for not just classrooms, but meeting rooms and even conference spaces now. And it does not require a rack mounted box to do the audio processing, the DSP. So check it out at Shure.com. In other news, Absent opened up their New York Experience Center literally last week, and we have some pictures of that. They are designing these experience centers because LED is kind of a complicated product, so that you can bring your customers. So if you're an integrator or designer and you want to bring your customers in to see the different types of LED that is available, these experience centers are specifically designed for that. In other news, NAB is getting ready to happen next week, and NDI announced version 6.2. Now, the big announcement there for version 6.2 is it also accommodates Pro AV. So they've already, they have, with 6.2, in addition to doing a better job accommodating Pro AV, but also includes metadata for PTZ control, tally, KVM, CEA, 708, MIDI, DMX, time text captions, a bunch of other features. You can find that story on our website at ravepubs.com, which is where you can find all the stories. In kind of a surprise, Atlona joined the SDVOE. Most of the companies that have been joining SDVOE the last year have been smaller companies that are upstarts from the broadcast industry or from the traditional AV industry. Atlona is a long-standing video distribution company, and they joined SDVOE and launched a new product at the same time. They launched the Pro 5, which is a video and audio routing product that also handles 10 gig. It's basically a 10 gig matrix, virtual matrix product using SDVOE. Smart Technology introduced something super cool. I love this product. It is Lumio, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. It's specifically for kids. It's like it's a cloud-based learning platform. And they added it as a feature to its Spark services ecosystem, I should say. It's driven through AI, so it's specifically aimed to K through 12, and allows you to do, for example, when you're doing lectures or you're talking to students, it will listen and it will automatically generate, for example, quiz-based activities. So you don't have to actually generate your own quizzes. It will listen to what you've talked to the students about and generate quizzes for you, but it also gamifies it, can even do game show style content as well. So it's really kind of cool. It kind of helps K through 12 make their class a little bit more interactive. I really like what they did with that. Liberty, used to be known as Liberty Wire and Cable. Now they're just known as Liberty. They entered the security and surveillance markets. Now, you may remember that we introduced a security news. We now have a newsletter called rAVe Security that covers both physical security and cybersecurity. That publication you can subscribe to at ravepubs.com. Go to the subscription button, and you can see all of our publications there. So Liberty's expanded into that market. So therefore, we're starting to see some more traction. We've had that newsletter about almost 2 years now. Down the road from me, I'm here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Down the road from me is this little school that you may or may not have heard of called Duke University. They are our rival, but they also have a great educational experience for their students. Duke's Law School just updated their entire law school with a new AV routing system using Extron's NAV system, and we have a case study on our website explaining how they did that. And I thought maybe you'd be interested in that. And one of the most popular segments and growing product markets, it's really helped us over the last half a dozen years, is UC. Well, now as we come out of the pandemic, and we're out of the pandemic, but as we're coming out of a primarily hybrid world and moving into a world where a lot of companies, big companies, everyone from Google to Apple to even small companies now are requiring their employees to go back to work. Government's requiring everybody to go back to work. Crestron's Video Bar 70 is a product you ought to check out as a UC solution, all-in-one solution. Check this video out that describes the product to you. That is a cool product. You really ought to check it out. It's got 4 cameras, as it said. What's neat about it is it does all that switching you were seeing without an operator automatic. It's using AI. It automatically does all that framing and switching to whoever's talking at any moment in time. Helps the remote participants feel like they're participating. But what's neat about it is it doesn't require any additional AI processing in the room. It's all AI on the edge. That's the Video Bar 70. It's new from Crestron. Check it out. Got a I should say, we did one case study at Duke University. I got a kind of a second one, and I'm going to cover this case study because I'm actually going to go and see this next month. PowerSoft actually helped this museum, I should say, kind of experience center museum in Tokyo, Japan, with a immersive experience of what it would be like to walk around the moon. I'm excited to see it. It's a VR kind of experience. It was integrated by Audiovisual Communications Limited out of Japan, and it's using PowerSoft's amplifiers. When you're trying to immerse somebody in an application, audio is the biggest part of that, right? I mean, when you think about when you're watching movies, you can set the tone of a scene, or TV shows, you can set the tone of a scene with the audio, right? It sort of puts you in the mood of what you're about to see. So you can imagine that audio is a big part of that, and PowerSoft drives that. That case study is available at ravepubs.com now on our website. And I want to now go, I'm going to hang out here because I'm going to come back after this interview, but I want to run the interview with Steph and Brian Scholl. Brian, as I mentioned to you earlier today, Brian is actually the head of the Yale Perception and Cognitive Lab. And this study is quite interesting. It was published on NPR recently, maybe a week and a half ago. I was listening to NPR on my drive home. And basically, to dumb the thing down, make it really simple, basically, he's saying that if you have a cheap mic, you come across as cheap. And if you have a more expensive mic, you come across as more professional. And, we kind of all assume this, but now we actually have cognitive, measurable, psychological data on that. Steph actually caught up with a Yale professor who did this study, and it's an interview with him. It's a very good, detailed interview. So I hope you really enjoy this. And you can use this study as a sales tool. Think about that. You can use this study to tell your customers, hey, it's worth spending more money on a better quality mic than the one built into your laptop. So let's run that interview.
Thank you so much, Gary. Okay, I'm so excited about this next segment where we are kind of getting into the science of it all, which we don't do that often, at least I don't. But joining me for this segment is Dr. Brian Scholl. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Not even close, Steph. Brian Scholl.
Scholl. Okay.
Perfect. Second time's the charm.
So you are a professor in the Department of Psychology, chair of the Cognitive Science Program, and director of the Perception and Cognition Laboratory at Yale University. So basically, you know what you're talking about. And we are really excited to have you on because we are talking about this study that Gary and I brought up last week on rAVe TV, but we're excited to have you talking about it this week. So if you want to just kind of give us a little bit of background about this study, it was inspired by something that happened on a video conferencing call, right? Tell us about that story and how it sparked this idea.
Yeah, sure. All right. So I'd love to tell you that this scientific research we did was inspired by thinking like really deep thoughts or something. But in fact, it just came from an everyday experience. It was shortly after COVID began. And like everything else in the world, our faculty meetings in the Department of Psychology all moved online, and they moved online with essentially zero notice, right? Mm-hmm. And so during that very first faculty meeting that we had online, we were discussing some contentious hiring issue or something like that, and everyone was weighing in. And 2 people in particular said some things that I thought were noteworthy. One of them was a colleague who was an especially close collaborator of mine. He's actually a former student of mine and someone who he and I just almost always see completely eye to eye. And he happened to be participating on short notice on this Zoom call using the microphone on an older, not so hot laptop. And so his voice had that like extremely like tinny quality that we're all completely familiar with in that context, right? And I just sort of noticed that his contributions to the discussion, they didn't seem quite so compelling as usual. Meanwhile, there was another colleague in the meeting. He's someone I also have a great deal of respect for, but we don't always see eye to eye on everything. We tend to have differing opinions. He happened to be participating in this impromptu faculty meeting from his home recording studio using high-end audio equipment. And Steph, everything he said sounded so rich and resonant. It was better than real life. And I found myself just like agreeing with what he had to say. So that was basically the germ of this. And we decided to turn this into some experiments.
Very cool. So tell me a little bit about the experiment, how you determined sample size, and how you went about that.
Yeah, all right. So we tried to keep this in many ways just as similar to real life context as we could. So we ran the study using online samples. So we had thousands and thousands of subjects, I think more than 5,000 in the end, spanning a vast array of ages and occupations and everything else. And each person just heard one audio clip. The audio clip was about 30 seconds long, and they came in a couple different varieties. One of them, for example, was someone basically reciting a little audio clip for a job application, right? Saying, hey, here's why I think I'd be a good fit for your company. In another case, it was a simulated dating ad, right? Someone was saying, hey, I heard your ad. I feel a connection here. If you're interested, maybe we could get together. Another one was someone describing what happened in the aftermath of a car accident and saying, hey, I shouldn't be responsible for this. Okay. So each of these were just little 30-second clips. And each person, each one of the subjects in our experiments, just listened to a single clip. And after that, they answered a very natural question. We just said, hey, in that last case, for example, how credible did you find that argument? And they answered just by using a slider on the screen, moving it between, hey, that was a very credible argument to, oh, I wasn't so convinced by that argument. Or in the hiring case, you'd say, hey, how likely, if you were in the job of a manager, would you be to consider hiring this person? Very likely, not so likely. So it was just a very everyday sort of intuitive judgment that you'd make about an everyday sort of clip. Mm-hmm. But of course, the key manipulation was the sound of the audio. So in one case, for all of these different examples, we had the audio played as recorded through a pretty decently, at least mid-quality from your perspective, let's say microphone. And in the other case, we took exactly that same recording, but we manipulated it so that it just had that sort of like tinny quality that we're all familiar with. And the results were just pretty striking. Based on every question we asked, this sort of like superficial quality of how the audio sounded caused people to be judged as less intelligent. Arguments were less credible. People were less hireable. People were judged to be less dateable, based not on what they were saying, but only the sort of superficial sound of how they were saying it.
That's so interesting. And basically, these effects of this study, they're irrational because this is based off of something that's superficial, Why is that distinction important in a world where we are kind of judged on Zoom before we even meet anyone in person?
All right. So, judging people on the basis of how they sound in general, of course, is not irrational. There are lots of things that we get from like first impressions from talking to people, and at least some of them are clearly valid. My favorite example is actually judging size and strength. Now that might sound weird until you realize that, right, a lion cannot make the sound of a chihuahua yapping, and a yapping chihuahua could not make the growl of a lion because their vocal anatomy just does not allow that. Similarly, right? A toddler cannot sound like a grown man. A grown man can't sound like a toddler. So in a sense, just from hearing a moment of someone's speech, you can tell something, at least, about like how big they are. And there's nothing irrational about that. Presumably, right, we evolved to make such judgments because for essentially the whole of evolutionary history of our species, the sounds of people's voices was determined by their internal qualities, like their vocal anatomy. But suddenly now everything is different because the sound of my voice to you right now, the sound of your voice to me, is based in part on who we are, in
Yeah.
part on our vocal anatomy, but in large part based on the equipment that we're using. And that is something that is like, does not reflect on, for example, the quality of my argument, right?
Right.
Suppose I was giving you an argument about, as in our experiments, about like why I shouldn't be held responsible for a traffic accident. And suppose I was like really hesitant with lots of pauses in my speech or something. You might or might not, find it reasonable to draw implications about like, am I telling the truth or something like that? But in this case, right, the key thing about this like manipulation that we used is that you couldn't make your voice sound like that if you tried, right? Human voices can't do that. So
Yeah.
it's not really something I could be held responsible for. In fact, we ensured this in 2 extra ways. In some of our experiments, instead of hearing an actual person, we actually did it with a computer rendered voice that was like one of those, computerized voices that's very clearly not a person. And we also applied the same sort of tinny manipulation even to the instructions in the experiment itself.
Oh, cool.
Right. So it clearly couldn't be something that reflected on the actual people. And yet it had all these implications. The reason, by the way, that we think that is getting into a little bit of the science now. Your body, Steph, has different parts. It's not all one thing, right? You have a heart, you have a liver, they work differently, they do different things.
Yep.
The same thing turns out to be true of the brain and the mind. It's not just one lump of spam up there. Some parts of your mind and brain are involved in hearing and making first impressions, and some of them are responsible for thinking. And so, I mean, you're right. These effects are completely irrational for all the reasons we just talked about. And if you think about it, of course, everyone knows that people aren't responsible for how they sound when it's that kind of manipulation.
Right.
But those sorts of beliefs just can't reach down and affect these impressions, these brute raw impressions we get from just hearing someone.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So, where we lead it back to our audience, this is full of AV integrators and tech managers, and they are constantly asked, does the mic really make that much of a difference? And this data seems to kind of shout, yeah, it does. So, what would you kind of say to help them drive that point home?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple things to like AV professionals. The first and most important thing, I'm sorry for this camera quality. I'm using an off-the-shelf webcam here. You get what you pay for. The second thing I'd say is that you can't and shouldn't trust those intuitions, no matter how much you work with them. If we've learned one thing in what we call cognitive science, the study of how the mind works, it's that our intuitions about how the mind works are often just fantastically wrong. And so you have to actually test it. But now when we do test it, Steph, you're exactly right. It turns out that these sorts of impressions make quite a big difference.
Mhm.
The magnitudes of these effects were on the order of like 7.5 to 10%, right? So people sounded, in terms of the placement of the scale, right? The arguments were about 8% less credible. People were 8% less hireable. And it's not a stretch to realize how that could really, really matter in any sort of competitive marketplace, where I imagine lots of the people listening to your program, the competitive marketplace is the market for people's attention,
Mhm.
right? If someone just seems a little more engaging, that could really make a difference.
Right.
The other thing I'll say is that, AV professionals, when you guys are like mixing the audio and preparing the microphones and stuff, first of all, you know exactly how people sound, and you're paying like lots of attention to that and manipulating it, etc. But the other thing about this study that I find so interesting for everyday people is that most of us who are just, say video conferencing on Zoom or something, or occasionally giving interviews, we know exactly how we look because on almost any platform, right? I'm talking to you here, and I can see if my hair is all messed up or something, but I have actually no idea how I sound to you unless I've tested it. I hear how I sound through my ears, but that could end up being very, very different from what you hear. In fact, During the pandemic here at Yale, I could teach a class and there could be, 350 people in a Zoom meeting,
Right.
all listening to me. And you know what? 350 people know exactly how I sound. There's only one person who doesn't know how I sound, and it's me. So, what you can really tell people who are struggling with this, maybe some skepticism over whether does microphone quality really matter, is just in the first place that you can't trust your intuitions because you don't know. You have no idea how you sound to other people unless you've done a lot of work to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So my last question that I have for you here is, do you now find yourself judging people's microphone quality in more meetings than you ever did before?
Yeah, it's a little unfortunate. I feel like I've become one of you. In the past, I never gave this a second thought, right? Except if it was extreme, right? If you have someone who's like has like a microphone where you literally can't hear the words that they're saying. By the way, I should mention, Steph, in our experiments, we had the subjects do word for word transcription afterwards.
Okay.
So we ensured that everybody heard the words perfectly well. They
Right.
understood the message. It was just about the audio quality. But now that we've run this study, of course, I'm just constantly paying attention to it. And, it's kind of annoying, to be honest. Like I walk around the world now just constantly paying attention to this. It's like if you learn about like fonts or typefaces, and then every time you see a logo, you're like, oh no, look at that.
Yeah, you kind of feel like it's very like Promethean in a way. Like now you've been given the tools, so now it's like the curse of you have the tools.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you see it
Exactly right.
everywhere.
It's all about what you're paying attention to, and suddenly I'm paying attention to things that I hadn't before. It hasn't really led me to like get great equipment myself, but maybe your interview here, Steph, will be the push that makes it finally happen.
Well, we have tons of people who watch this who can give you some really good recommendations. That's
I bet. Very good.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching and want to learn more about the study, you can go to our site, ravepubs.com. I have linked both the NPR article where we initially found out about this and, of course, the full study. So I think it's about $10 if you want to pay to read the full thing. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
That's right, Steph. And if you were to go to our lab website and hunt around a little bit, you might be able to find a version of that paper without paying the $10. Good luck.
Okay. Well, to those of you watching, good luck. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks, Steph. Bye-bye.
All right, I'm going to dig around. Actually, we got a copy of it. We paid for it. It's worth it. This is, again, a great sales tool, in my opinion, because you get a Yale professor who studies this stuff for a living to tell you that the higher quality microphone makes a difference. And, what better sales tool can you use than that? I also love his advice. Hey, listen to what you sound like, because not everybody does that. I also thought his observation of his colleague that he respects versus the one he has more conflicts with, how he perceived the information each one of them was giving him in that faculty meeting. I think we're all guilty of that, and so we know. I've always sort of referred this as, the person that has worse audio in a meeting is the stepchild of the meeting, because we really just don't want to hear from them unless we just have to, because it's just irritating because they sound terrible. I do have a couple other quick notes. Thanks, Steph, for that interview. I think that's a coup to get him. We're the first one in the industry to do that. Sony is doing a launch and learn all about the crystal LED, the CLED. They have a CLED for high brightness applications, a CLED for high contrast applications. It's the pinnacle of micro LED, and this is aimed at end users understanding the technology. In this session, we'll examine real-world applications of the crystal LED, or the CLED, in broadcast, virtual production, corporate boardrooms, and high-end retail. So if you're in signage or you're in broadcast, live events, those kinds of things, digital signage, you should definitely pay attention to this. April 3rd, that's tomorrow, at 1 p.m. You should definitely join this. It's going to be a great session hosted by Tim Albright of AV Nation. So sign up for that. And then we also have a launch week 11 coming up at the end of this month, April 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, every day from 12:30 to between 3 and 4. You can earn 7.5 CTS credits for joining the entire week, but you can also sign up and join whenever you want. So you can choose when to join. We'll track what you actually watch and give you the appropriate CTS credits. To register, you can go to launch.com, lavnch.com. And I want to thank everyone for watching me today. Steph and I will be back together next Wednesday. Have a great week.
It's the weekly show about Pro AV with the hottest news in the AV industry. It's rAVe TV. Give it up for Steph and Gary. Steph and Gary.